Hello everyone, welcome to Rivera Fine Art Studios. Today I am going to talk about shading from imagination. And if you had watched my previous video, I discussed shading these three different forms. So I started with spheres, I went through a series of three different spheres, then I talked about shading a cube and a cylinder. And these forms are very present in just about any subject that we can see. If we're drawing portraits, still lifes, figures, even landscapes, we can really start to pick out some of these forms. So today what I want to do is draw the portrait, and I'm going to do that from a few different views in different lighting situations. And if I have time, I will also draw the figure. So the first thing I want to do is construct the portrait using these different forms. So for these first few drawings, I'm just going to do very quick little studies. But if we are thinking about the head, we can break that up into two basic shapes. So the first thing I like to do is think about the upper portion of the head, which is very round. That's the cranium. And then if I'm doing, let's say, a 3/4 view, I imagine a little chunk is taken out of that cranium. So this becomes a flattened side. And this is, again, this is flat right here. And then when we get to this form, it becomes round. The second part of this is where the lower portion of the head would come into play, and that would be the mandible and the maxilla. So when we're looking at a portrait, the first thing I try to do is really think about the planes of the head. The planes are what is going to help me with figuring out the light and the shadow. And I'm just going to very lightly kind of mark out some of these forms. So I have the eyes will sit in here. I have the center line here for the nose. And if you're thinking about proportion, you can basically break this up into thirds. So I have hairline about here, and then this would be approximately where the brow line would sit. So that would be my second third, and then from the base of the nose to the chin is my lower third. Okay, now even with this much information, I can start to add some shading. So if I'm thinking about the nose, let's first think about the lighting. So my light is going to be coming in this way. So basically my form lighting here is what I'm going to be working with. And so the side plane of the nose can really be thought of as a block or a box-like form. So the side plane is going to fall in shadow because it's turning away from the light. And this is a very sharp edge. This shadow, this transition from shadow plane there, and then light plane would be sitting somewhere in here. So these are two planes coming together, which creates that sharper edge. It's not soft like a sphere. I can find some softer planes, but right now let me just go in and start to mark out some other shapes. So the eyes fall into sockets. So I have two socket shapes like that, like so. And again, this is a very rough sketch, so I'm not going for any type of super refinement here. I'm just really trying to get these planes in as quickly as I can. But typically, because the eyes are set into sockets, they fall into shadow. And then I divide up the upper or the side planes of the face, and that would be the temporal ridge would sit somewhere in here, and then I've created a line right here to show where the front and the side plane of the jaw would separate. And again, this falls into shadow. Okay, so I've just zoomed in here to refine this a little bit more, and because it's such a small scale drawing, just zoomed in so you can really see what I'm doing. But basically now I'm cleaning this up a little bit. So I am going to kind of pull out where my lights are, I'm going to get rid of some of these construction lines because I don't need them anymore. And really, drawing is simply, when I'm drawing in this way, I'm looking for shapes. I'm really thinking about shapes. I'm not thinking so much about lines. So my initial construction is done with lines, but now I'm really going to just start to evaluate my light shapes and my dark shapes. And more importantly, I'm going to start, as I refine this, I'm going to start looking for my transitions, where I have sharp edges and where I have soft edges. So a couple of other things that I want to talk about. I haven't really gotten into this, and I'll probably devote a whole other lesson to this, but cast shadows. So because the nose is a form which sticks out, it's going to throw a little shadow over this way. I'm going to get a cast shadow, which is a very sharp shape. You know, if we think about the shape of this shadow versus something like this, where the form is turning away from the light, it's just kind of rolling away from the light, moving in that direction, this transition becomes much softer. And, you know, again, this kind of goes back to plane changes. This is a softer plane right here, where I have the cheekbone, in comparison to something like this plane, the side plane and the front plane of the nose, where those planes separate. Okay, so I'm going to just kind of look at some of these values and soften them a little bit, or soften the transitions to make this a little bit more delicate looking. I'm also going to use my eraser as a drawing tool to pull out lights where I imagine they would be. So again, this is the cheekbone, which extends back. These are actually the two widest points of the front plane of the face. So the other cheekbone would sit somewhere over here, and that's a very wide plane, and then it all tapers down into the jawline. And let me just talk about the mouth for a minute. I haven't done anything there. So when I'm thinking about the form of the mouth, there's actually a big circular muscle, and these are all things that I go over in my online portrait drawing and painting classes. I offer those on my website, which is www.riverafinearts.com. So if you want more information on the anatomy, I go into that with a lot more precision than I'm doing right now. I'm just kind of blasting through a lot of this stuff. But basically, there is a roundness through the mouth from top to bottom. So starting at the base of the nose to about where the chin would come into play, which sits in here. And then there's also roundness this way from side to side. So even when we're starting to shade something like that, we can think about the roundness of this. So again, we're kind of going back to sort of the oval shape. You know, you have a shape like this, rounded here, whoop, and then there's a roundness through here. So as it turns away from the light, it's falling into shadow. So that's the kind of thing that's happening there. And then we also have the planes of the lips. Okay, so lips are really just a series of plane changes, and by alternating the light and the dark, I can start to show that. So upper lip's turning away from the light, so it's falling into shadow. Lower lip is coming out at an angle this way, so it's picking up the light, and then there's a shadow right under that lower lip. Okay. So I'm just going to really kind of clean some of this up a little bit, and then I'm going to do another view of the head. Okay, guys, so what I've done is I've just cleaned up some of my edges a little bit here. And I just want to kind of go over a little bit about some of the things that I am starting to think about. So when I'm looking at the cheekbone, basically that, again, is a round form. So just like I have here on this sphere that I drew, where I have my core shadow, my reflective light, and my halftone, some of those same things I can see right here. Like even the way that this cheekbone sort of comes around like this, you can almost think about that as the edge of a sphere. Okay, so I could just follow that shape right through, which essentially is what I did in the early stages. So I never really lose sight of that basic form. So the head really, once again, can be simplified into a sphere-like shape. I have something like that happening, you know, with that form lighting. I get that curved shadow on the one side. Let me shift over a little bit. And then I have this tapering form of the jaw that comes off of that. Okay, so the planes change a little bit right here, and it kind of comes down like that. Okay, but that's essentially the basic shadows that I'm working with. And then everything else, all these other secondary features, as I start getting more and more detailed, I'm just staying consistent with where the light is and where the shadow is. But these are really just kind of built upon that basic structure of the sphere and the tapering shape down here, whatever you want to call this. Some people actually like to think about the head in terms of planes. So that's another approach. I could really start thinking about where the front plane of this head is, where the side plane is, and then where the top plane is. So that's another approach to drawing out the head, and then I could just kind of put those other shapes into that. Okay, so two very different approaches, but both work very well. Again, the whole idea is to conceptualize, to start thinking about the head as a three-dimensional form. Okay, so I think I'm going to wrap it up there for today. Today's lesson was just kind of going through some of the basic forms that you can see in the face, but I'm definitely going to devote at least one more lesson to drawing the face, and probably another one to drawing the figure. I'm going to try to do a couple of different views of faces and different lighting situations. But in the meantime, I would definitely recommend to anyone who's interested in this just practicing drawing the basic forms. So practice drawing the sphere, cube, and cylinder, and shading those forms in different lighting situations. And then once you're comfortable with that, apply that to an actual drawing, whether it's a portrait, a figure, a still life, or even a landscape. You can certainly benefit from understanding the basic forms and the planes and how the light falls upon those planes. So this could even apply to drawing from life or from a photograph. So it's not just necessarily conceptual drawing, but it can also benefit if you're working from life or photo. Please, if you have any questions or there's anything that you were unclear of in today's lesson, just post comments below. If you enjoyed the video, you can subscribe to my channel. I post new videos very frequently. And in the meantime, happy drawing and painting.